Okay, let me show you some ways that the mind is different than the brain to demonstrate to you that why philosophical naturalism that atheisms might use to examine science, for example, is insufficient because it does not describe the nature of immaterial things that you and I believe as Christians are true. So let me show you some ways that the brains are different than minds. First of all, we could say this about minds and brains. Brains are in some way measurable. I could put them on a scale. I could weigh your brain. I could measure the distance of you, the length of your brain, the width of your brain, the mass of your brain. Brains are measurable. In the most rudimentary sense, we all recognize that minds are measureless. They cannot be measured in the same way. There's no weight to your mind, right? Your brain has weight, has mass, has width, has depth, but it does not, your mind does not have those attributes. There's a difference here. Already out of the gate, most of us have an intuitive sense that our brains are different than our minds. I've given you one way they're different. Let me give you another way they're different. You all know this guy. Now, before he ran for, I was talking about Ben Carson before he ever ran for president. I'm not a political person, so please forgive me if you're somebody who doesn't agree with Ben Carson's politics. I don't really care about that. I just know that Ben Carson is a neuroscientist. Now, if I was to ask Ben to think about his upbringing, the way he was raised, his relationship with his mother, the way I could ask him to kind of retrace in his mind his thoughts about the nature of his upbringing, his own personal history, how he was married, his childhood, all of that. Well, it turns out he would have certain thoughts. But if I was to, take the top of his head off and look at his brain, I could not recover these thoughts. I cannot recover his thoughts from his physical brain, even though I could publicly access his brain. Well, it turns out your physical brain is publicly accessible, but your thoughts are held privately. Even when you say, well, look, I know that there are certain aspects, when you think, I can see certain neurons are firing in your brain. Well, fine. But I'd have to ask Ben, what is happening when I see those neurons firing? Report to me the content of your thoughts. I cannot gain the content of Ben's thoughts from simply looking at his publicly accessible brain. Those thoughts are still entirely privately held. Yet another difference between the physical brain and the non-physical mind. Physical brains are publicly accessible. Your thoughts, your mind is not. It's privately accessed. Let me give you a third way that brains are different than minds. Let's imagine that we're out on vacation, we're together, and I'm staying at this vacation home that we've rented. This is all great, and I'm upstairs in the bedroom, and I think I hear a noise outside, right? A noise of an intruder who's about to enter our cabin, right? So I'm up here sleeping, and I have a thought. I'm thinking about the intruder who I think I hear downstairs trying to get into our cabin. Okay, great. Now think about this for a second. Your thoughts, okay, are about the intruder. In other words, your thoughts depend upon the existence of the material intruder. Your immaterial thoughts are dependent upon something. Do you see that? In other words, your immaterial thoughts are always about something else. Yet the something else they're about is not about something else. That intruder is not about, he just is, okay? Your thoughts are about, your immaterial thoughts are about, the material thing they're about is an is. In other words, this is something that's called philosophically the idea of intentionality. And this is yet another way, a third way, that the material brain is different than the immaterial mind. Your immaterial mind is always about, it's thinking about something, but material things are, your brain is not about something, it just is. I call this the difference between isness and aboutness, just to make it, kind of twist the idea of the language here, but it's really this concept the philosophers call intentionality. It's a third way that the physical brain is different than the non-physical mind. Let me give you a fourth way. So let's just stay in the same scenario. Okay, I'm thinking about this intruder, and I've got thoughts that this intruder exists outside. Now, I can be mistaken. Maybe the intruder doesn't exist. I just think there's an intruder outside when in fact there isn't one. Well, the actual physical intruder, whether he exists or not, that is open to dispute. He may not exist. I may just think he exists. But my thoughts about the intruder are not open to dispute. I'm having these thoughts. You cannot say, well, you're not having those thoughts, Jim. No, I am. Now, it may not be true. The physical reality, the physical entity, that is open to dispute. But the claim in my mental state is not open to dispute. Yet another way in which the physical entities are different than mental states. This is another way. One is disputable. The other is indisputable. I'm giving you a fourth way that physical brains are different than immaterial minds. Okay. So my whole point is that if I'm a physicalist, if I'm somebody who's an atheist, I deny the existence of immaterial things like minds and souls and angels and demons. All these immaterial things don't exist for me if I'm an atheist. And as an atheist, I didn't become a Christian until I was 35. They did not exist for me. These were just fictions that people created. But it turns out the immaterial brain, now I've shown you 4 ways that the mind is different than the material brain. The immaterial mind, rather, is different than the material brain. I'd have to at least concede there is such a thing as a mind. And that's very hard, which is why this is called the problem of mind. It's called the problem of mind because I cannot account for it under a materialistic, atheistic worldview. Let me give you a 5th way. I was part of a SWAT team for years. I'm the guy on the end there, on the very end of this image. That was me. Now, I can do some training with SWAT teams and describe for them what they will experience in a shooting. For example, I can describe for them the mechanics of their weapons. I can describe for them when you shoot somebody in a certain position, the physiology of humans is such that it reacts a certain way. I can describe for them the tactics you might use when you actually go into a room to make an assault. When you've got somebody, you're in the room trying to get barricaded a suspect, that kind of a thing. And I've had to actually do those kinds of entries, but that's fine. But it turns out that in the end, I could train you in all the objective, kind of impersonal material facts that are involved in shootings, the nature of the material gun, the nature of the material body, how these things interact when one shoots the other. I get all that, right? But in the end, after I involved in the shooting, I'm going to experience an entirely different set of facts that are based on my personal thoughts, that are subjective, that my beliefs that I enter into when I'm involved in a shooting, my feelings afterwards. In other words, physical aspects, like the physical nature of the shooting, that's all impersonal, but my reaction is personal. And those are the things that divide what's physical from what's non-physical. There may be some physical realities of what's happening in your brain, the sequence of neurons that fire, all of that, but you have subjective personal feelings and intuitions and experiences that are very different. Now, here's my whole point. I've just shown you now a series of 5 differences between physical brains and non-physical minds. These are not the same. To suggest in one way or another that somehow we are just physical creatures that just have brains and bodies, well, is to deny the difference between your brain and your mind. And there is a difference. And therefore, we've got to figure out, okay, these 2 things are not the same. And if they're not the same, you've just opened up a world that you have been denying if you're a strict physicalist.